United because we want to end this unlimited spending. Yeah, except everyone on this stage, except Amy and me, is either a billionaire or is receiving help from PACs that can do unlimited spending. So if you really want to live where you say, then put your money where your mouth is and say no to the PACs. Look, I think the way we build a democracy going forward is not billionaires reaching in their own pockets or people sucking up to billionaires. The way we build it going forward is we have a grassroots movement funded from the grassroots up.
Now, you heard for yourself a bunch of people groan when she was talking. I would imagine a lot of people were scratching their heads like, what the hell are you talking about? Sanders doesn't have super PAC. What she's talking about, you heard her, grassroots funded, all of us needs to be that way, etc., etc. What she's talking about, what she's referring to is National Nurses United, the Sunrise Movement, Dream Defenders, Center for Popular Democracy Action. There's only 19,000 in donations. People Action, 13,000 in donations. Our Revolution, average contribution $18. Make the Road Action Movement, Voter Project, Indivisible Project. My point is, the argument that she's making about billionaires and dark money and all this other stuff, she is calling the nurses movement or the nurses union, the Sunrise Move, she's calling all of these things that are small organizations, not taking in billions of dollars. She's calling these super PACs. That's mind-blowing. If you're going to make the argument that you should have a grassroots funded campaign, almost by definition, these are grassroots funded campaigns. And honestly, the notion that you'd call the Sunrise Movement a super PAC is, look, I've said she was dishonest and disingenuous, and it only presents further. I don't know why anybody would believe Warren's position on campaign finance. She has had 3 or 4 different positions on this. She gets into the race, no issue taking all the money in the world beforehand, and then I don't believe in unilaterally disarming Chris because up to that point, she had given everybody this impression that she was just going to be grassroots funded. Even then, she was lying because she took $11 million of money raised through these dark money wine cave events and dumped it into her presidential campaign, all the while telling people till she's blue in the face that she was a grassroots funded campaign. She was not, at least not in its entirety. She was being dishonest. Then she comes back and says, all right, when she realized the ludicrous position that I'm not going to take money in the primary, but I will take it in the general election. And she started getting a little bump in the polls and she started getting a little bit more cash. And she's like, all right, I'm just going to be grassroots through and through. And then within a day, that changed to, well, I'm going to raise money for the party, which effectively allows an end run around this notion of being grassroots funded through and through. Just because a person said something doesn't necessarily mean they're being honest. Was she being honest about Medicare for all? Was the public option she was pushing, was that indeed Medicare for all? No, it was not. Did Obama push for hope and change? No, he did not. Did he even work for hope and change? No, he did not. Politicians say all sorts of things. Oftentimes it's for political effect. Why on earth would you believe her position now, seeing as that position has been all over the place around this particular same area since she got into this race? Clearly, it does not dig deep in her. Clearly, this is something she's using for political effect. The only reason she would say, I'm not going to take it in the primary, but I will take it in the general, is that she wants to stand beside Sanders as a one-to-one and make it as if these two people are a similar, if not the same, quantity. I tell you this, she would kill for that endorsement from the Sunrise Movement. She would accept that from the Sunrise Movement, and she wouldn't be out here screaming that the Sunrise Movement is somehow a dark money supergroup, super PAC. Well, that didn't last long now, did it? Because her on that campaign stage, attacking the other people on that stage and then giving her wokeness to Amy Klobuchar, a few days later, or a couple of weeks later, now this is Warren, after she gets her own super PAC.
Had been leading the charge previously, saying they shouldn't have it even while there had been super PACs.
I had been leading the charge and not a single Democrat would agree to it. So every Democrat, when I said super PACs are a problem, just casually looked the other way and couldn't hear it. couldn't hear it. Look, the Democrats have to decide how we're running this primary. Unlimited money is not the way to run a primary, whether that unlimited money comes from a billionaire reaching in his own pocket or it comes from having other billionaires fund these super PACs. Either way.
Do you honestly believe that billionaires are funding the Sunrise Movement or the National Nurses Union or these other groups? I guarantee you they are not. These are just regular people just like you and me that is taking their scratch and putting it for a particular candidate. This argument is bogus. But let's let her finish.
We have to decide as a party how we want to run this. I believe we should do a no super PAC primary, but that means no super PACs for everyone.
Should the super PAC support them take down their ads?
I believe there should be no super PACs for everyone. And I still haven't heard another Democratic nominee who's willing to say, I'll sign on to that. Let's get...
Now, what's reality? What's the honest reality? Joe Biden, who initially was no super PAC, once he got a super PAC, he was hurting for cash. He accepted that super PAC. Andrew Yang supposedly was against it the moment that Andrew Yang was never hurting for cash per se, but when the math super PAC came into play, he was perfectly okay with accepting that. And Elizabeth Warren now has her own super PAC called Persist. The reality of it is Elizabeth Warren was hurting for cash, and Elizabeth Warren, as she typically does, was looking for an excuse to allow her to do something that she needed to do. In this case, her excuse is, well, none of the other campaigns jumped in on me and agreed with me when I said no super PACs. And so now that has given me complete permission to do super PACs. The reality of it is Elizabeth Warren was hurting for cash. She was hemorrhaging money. Right here. Warren is canceling a flight from Nevada and South Carolina from 2/17 to 23. So far, she's canceled over $350,000. E. Warren is cutting spending in both Nevada and South Carolina. She has ads running in both states up until the 16th, but looks like she's going off the air after that. So far, we've seen over a $300,000 cut. And right here, now she gets her super PAC. This is February 19th. How strange that all of this just so happened to occur within the same short window of time. She effectively has a dark money super PAC where billionaires are giving money to. To be honest, we don't know who's giving money to because it's a dark money super PAC. But ultimately, they are running ads on her behalf. The fact that she was cutting commercials and cutting flights to the various areas shows that she didn't have the cash. She was strapped for money. She needed that money. And so was she going to turn down the super PAC that was giving her money that she desperately, desperately needed? And they're not giving it directly to her. They're running ads on her behalf. I'm just making the point that she could not compete with the resources that she had at her disposal. A super PAC comes in, bails her out in some of these states. And now when asked about it, despite bitching at every other campaign about having super PACs, now she, all of a sudden, is perfectly okay with it. She doesn't want to accept it on her own. So what does she say? It's everybody else's fault that I'm accepting this super PAC. How sad. If you're going to own it, just own it. And just to make one other basic point on this. Sanders was never trying to skirt the rules on stuff like this. He ran ideologically that he was going to accept money from grassroots sources. He wasn't going to accept money from the billionaire class. He was going to run on a grassroots funded campaign. He understood that to some degree was a hindrance to him on some level because after all, if everybody else has these billionaires and these big ticket donors and you are taking the chance of running with a grassroots campaign, it is possible that you may not have enough. Look at what Warren did. Warren decided to try to run a grassroots campaign so she could compete with Sanders the moment that her support collapsed, where her money and the money that she was bringing in also collapsed. But Sanders was running a grassroots campaign through and through in his local races, meaning in the state race, but also in the presidential race. Whereas Warren took her money from the dark money groups and dumped it into her presidential campaign. Sanders never did that. My point is to make the argument that it's everybody else's fault, but your own, that you are accepting a super PAC, misses the point that accepting or taking an ideological stance against something is not necessarily entirely determined by everybody else. Sanders decided he was going to be grassroots funded through and through, in spite knowing that there would be somewhat of a headwind or some of a hindrance, or at the very least that he would be at a disadvantage in the amount of money that he can bring in and raise. He did it anyway. It dug in him. It wasn't a choice that he said, it's everybody else's fault that I'm taking this money. No, he made an ideological choice that he is going to run a grassroots funded campaign because in his mind, the only way to retain a certain degree of distance is by being your own person and to not accept their cash. The cash itself has tethers. If you want to make the argument that the Sunrise Movement has tethers and Sanders, okay, environmental policy is one of his main wheelhouses. If you want to make the argument that these kids of the Sunrise Movement are somehow equivalent to millionaires and billionaires putting money in Sanders, a point is basic. If you're going to accept a super PAC, then accept a super PAC. But don't blame everybody else for your reasoning for accepting the super PAC. The fact that Sanders was able to say, I'm a grassroots funded campaign, even though it may be a disadvantage, and even though it may be a disadvantage even in the main election, whereas all of these other sources are going to be dumping money into the other person's campaign, he believes it from an ideological, flesh-to-bone way. That ideological belief is the thing that powers his rationale and reasoning for raising money in the grassroots funded way. He didn't take the easy way out and just said, well, everybody else is doing it, so I'm just going to accept money from everywhere. He didn't make the argument like Warren did, I don't believe in unilaterally disarming. No, he had an ideological point of view that was espoused in the way that he's been running this campaign. This squirrely, it's everybody else's fault that I'm now taking a super PAC, despite me repudiating super PACs for the last couple of weeks. Weak. On the last show, on the last item, Buttigieg. It seems that Buttigieg has shot his load. Buttigieg dumped a ton of resources into Iowa, and he was burning the candle at both ends. Now, if your name is Buttigieg, this has a certain logic to it. If you don't do well in Iowa, you're not going to have a New Hampshire. You getting to New Hampshire entirely depends on how well you do in Iowa, because Iowa and New Hampshire are the two main states that are going to be your best demographic. Those are the two whitest states. The white states are effectively the states you're winning in spades, meaning I think like 90% of the support were white. And so if you don't do well in these two states, you're not going to do well anywhere. So if your name is Buttigieg, you have to dump a ton of resources in the Iowa, resources that you may not necessarily have, resources that are going to leave you short for the upcoming states when you're going to things like Super Tuesday and you have all those states that you have to cover at once, or for that matter, even Nevada, or for that matter, even South Carolina. My point is, the money that Buttigieg had to dump into Iowa was necessary to keep Buttigieg viable for the two states that he needed to remain viable. You try to figure it out after the fact, but there is no even trying to figure it out if you don't make it out of Iowa and New Hampshire intact. So Buttigieg dumped a ton of cash into Iowa. He gets a bump from Iowa with a fake win. He goes to New Hampshire still with a pretty decent bump. And now he is going to face all perdition going into areas that are less favorable to candidates like him and Klobuchar. The catch here is he's sending out a desperation email, begging, pleading for cash. This is Politico. It must be clear, campaigns are about more than just polling. Meaning, just because somebody says, yeah, I think the guy's more electable, that doesn't necessarily touch the fundamentals on the ground, the get out the vote campaign, the money for ads, the money to use to get all of these people into the political process, the events that you might be able to throw. Cash, your ability to galvanize people, to bring in support, including muscle. And I don't mean this in a threatening way. I just mean dollars or pitchforks. When you have a lot of people backing you and energized, well, those people affect a certain degree of power down in the various states. But if you don't have the resources to put into those states, it doesn't necessarily matter if people are saying, yeah, I can vote for that guy. If you don't have the manpower, if you don't have the resources, then you will be undermined just from that very specific point of being drained away, of not having enough resources to actually put the case that you need to make to the public. The effect of Bloomberg in this is overwhelming. You must understand, of the people that were on the debate stage, Bloomberg had spent $400 million. What does that mean for everybody else? That means everyone else in the campaign, by definition, has to somehow compete with Bloomberg, meaning they have to increase their own expenditures to somehow create some level of parity. So Sanders spends $40 million. That's Bloomberg spends 10 times as much as Sanders. Sanders was the next closest person. Put that in perspective. So what does it mean for somebody like Buttigieg or somebody like Warren, who you have South Carolina, you have California, you have Texas, you have all of these other states that you have to cover for the most part around the exact same time. Bloomberg has the resources where he can drop millions, if not billions, into this race. You can even make a decent argument that he's already dropped billions into the race from the people that he was buying off, the endorsements, the money that he's spending up and down the Democratic Party over the last few years to purchase the machinery of the party. But what does it mean for everybody else? The very fact that Bloomberg turns the curve up in the way that money is being spent forces the other campaigns to do the same. And the campaigns that are cash-strapped are now showing stress. Sanders is a monetary dynamo, but the same thing can't be said for the other people in the race. So it's very possible that Bloomberg may be able to snuff them out just from the standpoint of increasing the amount of money that is being spent just to remain viable as a candidate. There's more than just the problem of a billionaire being in the race. There's also this notion of the billionaire skewing the expenditure of cash. He's trying to buy the race. And and Buttigieg is suffering for it. You can even make a case that Warren is suffering because of it also. Pete Buttigieg campaign set a goal of raising $13 million by Super Tuesday in an urgent new fundraising message, a sign of the financial pinch Buttigieg and other Democrats are feeling as they try to compete with Bloomberg. Buttigieg's letter, we're no longer just up against Bernie Sanders, the Washington politician who's been running for president for years, Buttigieg wrote in an email. We are now up against a billionaire who's throwing colossal sums of money on television instead of doing the work of campaigning. Now, this is coming from somebody who has like 40 billionaires backing him, meaning Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg seems to be complaining that this billionaire jumped into the race. He's trying to take my job being the friendly face of the billionaire class. The guy got 40 billionaires backing him, and he's complaining about a billionaire being in the race. So let's keep going. That's not how we should choose a president, Buttigieg continued. So today, we're being honest with folks who's gotten us here. We need to raise a significant amount of money, about $13 million before Super Tuesday on March 3rd in order to stay competitive. Now, let's put this in perspective. In January, Buttigieg raised $6 million. All of January, $6 million. In the same time frame, Sanders raised $25 million to show you the difference in the incoming revenue stream that these guys have. By the same token, despite only raising $6 million in January, he spent $14 million in January. Again, he had to win Iowa. There was no after Iowa if he didn't at the very least do well in Iowa. So it's not necessarily insane that he would dump a huge amount of resources into Iowa and potentially New Hampshire because those are states that were required wins. But now you have the secondary issue of how do we keep going into the other states now that we're out of Iowa and New Hampshire? And that's where the pinch comes in. But again, you're stuck in the situation of we'll figure it out later. We have to do this now. We don't have a choice. He spent $14 million in January after only raising $6 million in January. This leaves him with $6 million cash on hand, which, again, is not a lot when you're talking about running in a campaign, especially when you have a campaign with a billionaire or two billionaires in the race. Buttigieg raised $11 million so far in February, and that's after he finished top. Or that's after he came in, claimed a fake win in Iowa and came in second place in New Hampshire. So think of it this way. In January, he raises $6 million. He gets a bump from the fake win in Iowa and from coming in second in New Hampshire. That allows an increase in revenue. Again, coming across as you doing well in a particular state. It's not just you doing well in that state. It's also the people who are willing to give you cash because you do well, because it keeps your chances alive. Now, if those people were smart, those people would realize that the moment that you get into areas where there are more than two people of color, then Buttigieg and Klobuchar's potency diminishes significantly. So yeah, he's making people a few true believers, or he's getting people to trust in him just a little bit more because of his second place showing in Iowa, New Hampshire. But how does that look going forward? He was able to raise $11 million so far in February, which is almost doubling what he made in January. But in order to make this work, meaning in order to raise $13 million by Super Tuesday, he is going to have to raise $1 million a day. $1 million a day. If he doesn't do well in Nevada, if he does not do well in Nevada, this money is going to dry up as fast as this money was coming out, because it is going to be a rude awakening for some that believe that he may be able to outperform, he may be able to overcome, he may be able to con African Americans into backing him and supporting him. I think he's going to get a rude awakening in Nevada and in South Carolina. And I have a hard time believing that he is going to be able to generate this much money, $1 million a day, before Super Tuesday. But we'll see. The catch becomes what happens in Nevada and what happens in South Carolina. And I have a strong belief that Warren is probably going to come in number 2 in Nevada, maybe 3rd. Meaning it's going to be either Biden or Warren coming in 2nd and 3rd, leaving Buttigieg to fall at 4th or 5th. I don't necessarily think you exceed his funding needs under a guise or a scenario like that. I think it's going to be a rude awakening for people who are dumping money into Pete. But we will see. I could be wrong. I do love the fact, though, that Pete is hurting for cash. And hopefully, honestly, that's not true. I want Pete to stay in this race as long as Pete wants to stay in this race. He is going to be sucking away support from Biden. He's going to be sucking away support from Warren. And to some degree, he's going to be sharing that vote with him, Klobuchar, Bloomberg, and Joe Biden. Stay in the race, Pete. Stay in the race. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.